Welcome back. This story is called Harry Katz. Harry Katz was my grandfather, my mother's father. He passed away when I was 10 years old. He was in his 80s. He was a Russian immigrant, and he spoke with a heavy Russian accent, even though he'd been here since he was 12 years old. I heard somewhere on TV or something, somebody say that 50 years after your death, no one on earth will know who you are, who you were, right? 50 years after your death, nobody on earth will know who you were. Well, that's not true, because Harry Katz died when I was 10 years old, 50 years ago, and I know who Harry Katz is. So that shows you that it's not true. Harry Katz was born in Russia. He grew up in a village. My mom told me this. He lived in a house that had a dirt floor. I was never able to wrap my head around that concept of a dirt floor, because I'd always think, well, how do you clean it? Obviously, you can't clean it. And what happens when it rains? These are things I thought of. And I thought, well, why can't you just make the house a little bit smaller and use some of the leftover lumber to make a floor? It made no sense to me that he would live in a house, or anyone would live in a house with a dirt floor. When he was 12 years old, he took a boat across the Atlantic to New York. And his plan was he was going to live with his sister and her sister's husband, who were living in New York City. The boat ride took 2 months. When he got to New York, he was met at the station, or wherever he was, the port, by his brother-in-law, the man who was married to his sister here in New York. And the brother-in-law told Harry Katz that his sister had died. She died while he was in transit. So he had no idea that she was dead when he got to New York. Interesting side note, before I tell you what the brother-in-law did. When he got to New York, he went to Ellis Island, like all the immigrants did at that time, Ellis Island. And he gave his name to some guy in Ellis Island. His name at that time, according to my mom, was not Harry Katz. His name was Harry Kurtz, K-E-R-T-Z, Kurtz. And for some reason, whoever it was that took that information from him decided that Kurtz was not an American-sounding name and changed it to Katz. So he went from Kurtz to Katz. To me, there's very little difference between Kurtz and Katz, but somebody decided that his name should be Katz and not Kurtz. So that's how he became Harry Katz. When he met the brother-in-law told him that the sister had died. And instead of taking care of him, the brother-in-law put him on a train headed west, like Horatio Alger. Go west, young man. So my grandfather, speaking no English, was on this train by himself going west. He ran out of money when he got to Springfield, Illinois. So he made it about halfway across the country. He ran out of money. He had to get off the train. He got off the train in Springfield, Illinois at night, and he was wandering around the streets. And he came across a kosher butcher. He recognized it as a kosher butcher because he recognized the Hebrew letters on the sign. So he laid down on the ground in front of this butcher shop and fell asleep. The next day, the butcher came to work and saw my grandfather on the ground, and talked to him and figured out what was going on and got the whole story about the sister and everything. And the butcher, the kosher butcher, told my grandfather that he could stay at the butcher shop and live in the basement, and then he could help out in the shop. So he actually had, a place to sleep and some work to do. This went on for several years. While my grandfather was in Springfield, he started his own little business, his own little side gig. What he did was he would go around to all the stores, all the supermarkets or whatever they were called, grocery stores in Springfield. He would go into the trash behind the stores where the trash was and pull out burlap bags. Burlap bags is what they used for like potatoes and onions at that time. You can imagine a burlap bag. He would take these bags out of the garbage, take them home, wash them, and then resell them to the farmers. So in other words, my grandfather was like the first recycler in America. He came up with this idea himself. And he did so well at this that by the time he was 19, he had enough money to buy a horse and a cart. And he would take his horse and his cart, and we would go around all over Springfield, going to all these stores, going to the back, taking these burlap bags out and putting them on his cart now, washing them, and then reselling them to the farmers. Well, the butcher took note of this. And he said to him, you know, I like what you're doing. You're making good money. I want you to marry my daughter. Okay, this was totally new, totally unheard of for my grandfather. And before I tell you what my grandfather did in response to this, I want to tell you one little side piece about him. My grandfather was missing a piece of his finger. So his hand looked like this. I don't know if you can see that, but there was like a top joint of one of his fingers was missing, completely missing. And I asked my mom, I said, how did Grandpa lose his finger? Here's what she told me. When he was back in Russia with his friends, he and a bunch of his friends got their hands on a bunch of fireworks, like firecrackers and stuff, fireworks, and they opened them up and they took the gunpowder out of these fireworks and put it in a can. Basically, they were making a stick of dynamite. And guess what happened? The thing went off and Harry lost his finger. That's how Harry Katz lost his finger. When the butcher told Harry, my grandfather, that he was going to marry the butcher's daughter, my grandfather, in the middle of the night, got up, took his horse, took his buggy, and skedaddled and moved to St. Louis. And that's where he settled. And he became very successful in the burlap industry. He was selling, what he did was he was selling landscaping supplies. He took the burlap and turned it into a business selling landscaping supplies, a business which existed for many, many years, many decades. He ran this business. At one point, my mom told me at one point he invented a machine that would take burlap and wrap it around the ball of a sapling. In the old days, when you buy a sapling, it came with a root ball, dirt, covered in burlap. Well, my grandfather invented a machine that did that. And my mom told me that at some point, somebody ripped him off and created their own machine just like it, but they were doing it wrong. And they were double wrapping the burlap and the trees were dying. So my grandfather got this terrible reputation by mistake of selling these burlap covered root balls inappropriately, which was not true. He was selling them fine. He eventually passed away when I was 10 years old. My mom there were 7 kids. She had 3 brothers and 3 sisters. And I remember this very well. Each of the 7 kids was put in his will, received $186,000. I don't know why, but that's just the figure they came up with. And each of the grandchildren, including me, there were 21 of us, each got $10,000. So you do a little bit of math and you come up with a number that's pretty high. I mean, we're talking about almost $1 million that he had accumulated in his lifetime. And like I said, he passed. I don't remember anything else about him other than he had this Russian accent and had this finger missing. One time, my mom told me he gave Charles Lindbergh a ride to the airport. I don't know what the circumstances were, but he gave Charles Lindbergh a ride. My grandfather gave Charles Lindbergh a ride to the airport. And then my uncles, his sons, ran the business. After my grandfather passed away, they ran the same business, the landscaping business, until they basically ran it into the ground and it disappeared. And that's the story of Harry Katz. Don't forget to read my book, Broccoli Time by Dante, available now on Amazon Books. It's the best parenting book you will ever read.